Good morning, LinkedIn. Happy Wednesday, November 6th, 2024. Reaching
Mhm.
reaching the end of the year.
Yep.
And here to talk about first episode of Let's Build HubSpot Operations with Chad Hahn. How you doing, man?
Hey, doing well, doing well. Love me some Operations Hub, so I'll talk your ear off all day.
Indeed. I've been loving both how you're able to talk about it more on the Hub Heroes podcast and what's being pulled out of people like George and Max and even
hmm
Liz
hmm
in terms of like being able to nerd out a little bit more,
hmm
understand, like make the complexity, right? Let's be honest, we're talking about complex
Oh
topics
yeah.
here, but make it
hmm
more tangible,
hmm
consumable, things
hmm
like that. So I've been loving listening to that, and I don't think it's news for anybody that Operations Hub, uh, from an enablement content perspective,
hmm
could use some help. And so
Yeah.
I'm excited to chat with you today, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I think, man, that's right on the money. Um, Ops Hub is like this magical box. There's a lot of mysticism and sorcery. It almost feels like in that magical box. But at the end of the day, it's data management. It's supercharging your data, and I just have a real passion for what it allows us to do as HubSpot super admins, HubSpot builders of things that you can't do without it natively in HubSpot.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way to put it. And even the way you put that, like natively in HubSpot, we're talking about Operations Hub, which is in HubSpot.
hmm
So like this is where it's like what's native, what's not. Are we
hmm
customizing? Are we configuring like private
Right.
apps, integrating pieces of HubSpot,
hmm
right? So maybe I can put it like this, because the most I've seen talk about it on LinkedIn is that hearing more and more, it's like, oh, this is a requirement. Like if you
hmm
have a HubSpot portal, like
Yeah.
if anything's required for anybody, it's this,
hmm
right? So if I didn't know that and I have it in my portal or I'm thinking about it as a HubSpot customer, like what are the hurdles that you're seeing people like, okay, I get it, it's required, I want to do it. Like, but why? Like, why is it
Why?
required?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. I mean, that's one of those things. It's hard to think like, okay, um, I am going to buy this hub, but I don't know exactly how to use it. Right. Well, um, I mean, just innately out of the box, it enables a lot of things like some pre-configured data sets now in Ops Pro to give you a jumping off point for deal reporting, for contact reporting with some of the HubSpot default properties. Man, I know we've talked about this in general, but if you haven't seen Kyle Jepson's default HubSpot property cheat sheet, you need to be aware of those properties. And if you're not using them, you should be using them because like all the native HubSpot reporting references all those properties and all those native data sets that come with Ops Pro or with any Pro Hub will reference those properties. So do not build. I know there's a lot of properties the first time you're getting it. I know there's a lot out the box, but when don't overlook what's there, always do a sanity check, right? Before you start adding properties, because that's what can make your portal cleanup later just really hard because now you've duplicated things that didn't need duplicated because it already existed in the native portal. But anyway, just go, bring that back home. Like, um, I'm buying Ops Hub or I have it, right? At least just start working with it. It's kind of like with the Breeze thing, we were talking about on Hub Heroes earlier this week. Like, what do you do with Breeze? Well, just use it, check back often because they're bolting on all sorts of features to it real quick, and it's doing better and better and more and more. And the same thing with Ops Hub. I mean, I still do not believe people are talking enough about how a like $2,800 a month MSRP feature is now in an $800 a month plan, which is, custom data sets. Like They used to charge $2,800 a month before discounts for that feature, and you get it in Ops Pro. Like, use it. Like, even if you don't know how, I mean, they've added all sorts of simplifications to making those custom fields and data sets, which we could talk more about later. But um, it's a little weird at first. You just got to get in and start using it.
Well, let's talk about that. And I wasn't sure like if we were gonna get to screen share, but this immediately, makes me want to,
Mm-hmm.
because, and I'm gonna just start sharing here because,
Mm-hmm.
like, for various reasons, these new hubs, um, have been challenging
Mm-hmm.
to even target like what kind of content will help people.
Right.
And when you say, like, if you were to say, go start using it, and you fill in the blank of like CRM. Okay, here's the
Mm-hmm.
CRM section that I go to. Maybe that's what he's talking about. Or marketing hub. Okay, I can go here.
Mm-hmm.
Content hub here. Commerce hub here. So when you say go start using it,
Mm-hmm.
what am I clicking on
Yeah.
in HubSpot to go do that?
Yeah, that little hard drive stack of platters over there under the, the above the folder on the left hand sidebar, the data management, right? You go
Okay,
there,
so
data
not
sets.
not yet like reporting and
Mm-mm.
automations and a lot of
Nope.
the things that people
Mm-hmm.
associate with Operations Hub
Mm-hmm.
because it Operations Hub has actually expanded and empowered a lot of those
Mm-hmm.
capabilities of
Right.
those tools that
Right.
come with all the other hubs,
Mm-hmm.
right? And this is where I remember I know some conversations have been had like maybe it should be called the data management,
Mm-hmm.
hub.
Right. the
Personally,
DM hub.
I like the overview perspective of we're trying to
Mm-hmm.
solve for business operations,
Yeah, for all
with this
hubs. I
hub,
mean, it's,
right?
in this case, like, I really feel passionately that, like, getting Operations Hub is like taking and putting a supercharger on your car, right? It's like gonna give you more air for your fuel mixture that's gonna make your engine run faster. Like, that's exactly what it is. It's gonna, like, enhance all the other innate things about your motor in this case, your engine in this example, right?
Right. Yeah. So which part of the data management are we heading to
Yeah.
first?
Well, if we're going to talk about data sets, like the fact that they took this $2,800 a month feature and dropped that sucker down to $800 a month, like, I mean, you can get it cheaper too. Like, especially if you start coming at the end of a quarter and the end of a year. Oh, baby. Yeah, you could talk them down pretty good for like a whole year. They're looking to sell in the long term. The HubSpot sales reps are. Anyway, data sets. And there's some cool stuff in here, man. But really what you get with Ops Pro is the ability to create custom data sets, right? They also added this CSV data sources, which is pretty cool too. So if you have a data set, you can actually now upload a CSV and create a join between one spreadsheet of information to the deals table, for example. And if you have, say, a property like lead source or something like that on your deals that gets set, and you have maybe accounting expenditures where the you're exporting your bills from accounting and the vendor name matches the lead source name, then you could actually link how much you spent per lead
Mm.
source and break that sucker down. I mean, that's been notoriously difficult to do in HubSpot, but now that you have something
Is
like
that
this, well, all you need to do is upload a spreadsheet once a month, and now you have your monthly numbers on what you spent per lead source.
yeah, is that the kind of stuff that people usually lean on like Google, um, Google Sheets
Mm-hmm.
and connecting HubSpot to that?
Yeah, connecting HubSpot to Sheets. I've done that before with like Google App Scripts. Man, if you never really gotten into Google App Scripts, like you can ask ChatGPT to help you write a Google App Script that can like send webhooks, receive webhooks. Like, I mean, you could do all sorts of and process and parse data inside of a Google Sheet every time a row is removed or a row is added. or you can even hook a private app up to it. So like you can even get your Google Sheet hooked up in such a way where when a merge occurs, it'll find the two rows and then remove the one that you didn't keep and will delete a row. I mean, there are a few limitations here and there, but you can really get a spreadsheet's data in very, very, very tight sync with your HubSpot data if that's necessary for some sort of other external system that you can get into a spreadsheet. But you know, little birdie told me that there could be some sort of Google Sheet goodness in our future, possibly.
Awesome. Yeah,
And
I love it when this stuff is kind of like a signal
mhm,
as a like if CSV can be used here,
exactly.
then there's
This
open
is the beta,
APIs,
you know?
right? Like in theory, the CSV could live somewhere else,
Yeah,
uh,
exactly.
right?
Exactly.
And that's where I love uh like getting into like one of the places I like to um look at is just
Mhm,
this because they're content not only just it's a visual representation of
mhm,
what's starting to happen and like Chad was mentioning earlier, like don't overlook the properties. This is probably a better way. I
mhm,
think unless you're the admin, right? And maybe you just want a list of properties, right? And that's how you operate. But if you need a contextual version of like, okay, it's great not to overview the property
mhm.
or not to overlook properties, but
Yeah.
exactly how can I make sure that that property exists and it exists where I need it to and it's going to behave the way I want, right?
Mhm,
This view here, um, where I can click on, the contact
mhm.
object and it
Yep.
starts to show me, you know, these properties,
Mhm.
um, because this is
Really, it's
where like,
amazing the used in and the fill rate. That's so helpful to know if your team's using it or if it's a custom property or if it's a HubSpot property, right? I mean, it's so helpful to be able to see that at a bird's eye view because it helps you from junking up your portal.
yeah. And I think, and I'd love your take on this because what we just showed is this ability to CSV, like to bring something in a CSV
Mhm.
and then use it, like use it inside of HubSpot, but not in the way that you got to import, like, and we're like
Records.
creating
Yeah. You don't
records
have
and
to
stuff
import
like that,
records. Yeah.
right? It's not even necessarily HubDB, which is
Mhm.
specific to, which was designed to support
Mm.
websites, but can be
Right.
used in lots
Other
of different
ways.
ways in the system. Um, so often, I think part of the value prop of Ops Hub, right, is again
Mm.
being able to interact with other systems in ways that we weren't able to before. And those
Mhm.
ways often like, how do we take advantage of the native tools in
Mhm.
HubSpot? Because without that CSV, without Ops Hub, if I want data coming from another system, it's a
Mhm.
custom integration, whether I like it or not,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And now, like, because so like one of the most common use cases I hear is like, oh, we need our post sales data like in
Mhm.
HubSpot, but I don't want to even think about integration with an ERP. I've tried that before,
Right.
didn't work,
Yeah.
right? Well, instead, the same person who's just retyping in everything because we don't have the systems integrated,
Mhm.
they're responsible at the end of the day for exporting the spreadsheet.
Mhm.
And then there's lots of ways that we can just bring that spreadsheet into HubSpot. And
Mhm.
now we have the data and we didn't have
Mhm.
to
Right.
do this crazy, like expensive and
Mhm. Time
time suck
intensive.
build out,
Mhm. Yeah.
right?
And resource
Because
intensive
really
too. I
that's,
mean, those build outs cost a lot of operations in a middleware platform, or you have to run it on your own services, which requires you to host a cloud instance of like a virtual machine that'll run your code that you can set up, resources to deploy builds to, and you need your version control. I mean, it's like a whole thing to set up all that infrastructure. Like that's nuts. Um,
yeah.
I mean, I think the
And
the
maybe,
argument for Ops Enterprise is now that they've added Amazon S3 Data Lake, they've had Snowflake data share, and they added, I think, Google BigQuery. So you can actually
oh, wow.
take and dump your HubSpot data into some sort of external query tool that is designed to handle big data. it keeps it in sync with that. So you say, I need these objects or this data in there. And then from there, you can use that external system. But this really, like the CSV import levels up the amount of complexity that it takes to actually perform all of your reporting in HubSpot, especially for small to mid sized businesses. I mean, just think about how much money it would cost to either go with the big boy solution and like put it in a data lake of some sort, or to go with the other solutions of building a custom integration and having a bills custom object where every bill that goes into your system gets associated to the correct deal and all that, like, and we've successfully implemented that for our clients because we put them, roofing business partner, where the solutions partner I work with, is we put everybody on QuickBooks Online. If they're not on QuickBooks Online, either we need to scope something out or they just manually, need to add it, because like that is a tough thing to build that so it's accurate, right? Getting that expense
Yes.
data attributed to the proper records, et cetera, right?
Yeah. And that's where like so many challenges, like when you aren't familiar with how these systems work and you don't even have your own
Mm-hmm.
current state like mapped out really well, like,
Mm-hmm.
and you go and find solutions and it's like, oh, ready, plug and play, like QuickBooks integration.
Right.
And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, really? Uh, so I actually did an episode with Joe Warren talking about their updated version, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so much of the challenge is that QuickBooks has a data model, HubSpot has a
Mm-hmm.
data model.
Oh
They
yeah.
are not the same,
No.
right? And
The
it's like,
customer sub customer thing is like that's a whole thing when it comes to QuickBooks. Like, yeah. I mean,
right,
it's a whole thing, that the way that works, and they don't have associations in the same way. They can link some things, but then if you link certain things, they're not accessible via API. Like, yeah, I'm very, very familiar with the QuickBooks API. I don't know if that's fortunate or unfortunate. The jury's still out. I'll tell you what.
well, your sacrifice is appreciated. Because that's those are the kinds of systems, like as much as we love HubSpot,
Mm-hmm.
there's way more QuickBooks users in the world. There's
Oh
way
yeah.
more, uh, not way more as far as ERPs, but these other systems that as soon as we go customer platform mindset, right, we
Mm-hmm.
have to learn how to play well with these other systems. And for
Yeah.
me, I love having the conversations of, and this is where a lot of these tools just create awareness
Mm-hmm.
of what is in the system already, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially like limits, um,
Mm-hmm.
looking at this much easier and
Yeah.
understanding this instead of running into it
Mm-hmm.
in an unplanned way.
Right.
Um,
Yes. Oh, hey, you get that email like, oh, you're nearing the call to company association limit because your calling provider and you use like a none.com email for people who don't have an email because you need to have an email. And then all of a sudden you have, nearly 10,000 calls associated or whatever. Right. Yeah. Then like
yeah,
all of a sudden the whole company's freaking out because they don't understand that actually that's not an important association because that's not a real company. But they're getting emails about it every 3 days.
yeah, no, exactly. And that's where like this awareness that we're creating over
Mm-hmm.
here, like without the awareness, this is where like this shift to customer platform that we always
Yeah.
talk
Yeah.
about,
Yeah.
like we have the tools to be
Mm-hmm.
that, you know, most important business platform.
Right.
But until we can have that conversation, and if we can't very clearly describe what's going on, especially when it comes to the money, like revenue,
Mm-hmm.
expenses, then automatically the QuickBooks, the ERP is the system of record because we
Mm-hmm.
have to trust the money in, the money out. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's no wiggle room there.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's where until that point, HubSpot is the marketing and sales tool. Like, okay, go
Mm-hmm.
have your fun over there. When you're ready, we'll bring the data we want,
Right.
right? Or what I've also seen and don't necessarily agree with is, okay, we know we need these systems communicating, but we don't exactly know how, so we're just going to digital twin, them.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
generally, we're wrecking the HubSpot data model, in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion, when we do that.
Yeah.
Um, so using these tools to help you understand what's available in HubSpot,
Mm-hmm.
like to really define, like, okay, I can use this information. So in the ERP or in QuickBooks, I need that, 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 and that, right? Instead of just saying, okay, HubSpot has no value, so we're just going to push just contacts, companies, and deals, and then
Mm-hmm.
everything else gets handled in the other system,
Right.
or just send it all over, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So based on that, and based on when you, like you're saying, like the addition of S3, these really like a lot of enterprise level tools
Mm-hmm.
as far as
Yeah.
data management and the CSVs. Let's try to keep it real if we can. Um, like what, like at some point, all of these modern systems, the answer to the question, can you do it, is yes,
Mm-hmm. Right.
right? No matter what
You
system it
can,
is,
but how or why
right?
or when?
And should it be there? Like, should we
Yeah.
use that system just because we
Mm-hmm.
can develop the hell out of HubSpot now? Like, there's others, like,
Mm-hmm.
it's, you get closer to the non-customer focused stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Those
Mm-hmm.
are the things that other systems are better suited to do. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
with this operations hub capability, when we hear
Mm-hmm.
about extensibility, customization,
Mm-hmm.
where are the limits of HubSpot right now? Like, where do you not want to say, yes, we can do that in HubSpot?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
With Operations Hub, maybe specifically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I would say like some of the limitations come through like man, like if we're going in Operations Hub, it's like activity based workflow type stuff. If I want to trigger based on activities, I can only trigger based on activities related to contacts in an event based way. And then if I want any associated information to that activity trigger, I can only get the most recently dealt with object, like most recently created or first created or most recently associated or whatever. Like one thing that pushes me outside of Ops Hub or workflows all the time is dealing with search. Like I need to search for other objects in the system to try to create an association. Or when a search is returned, it returns multiple options, right? So it returns an array of contacts, and looping through that array is like impossible without custom code in HubSpot. So like unless you want to write a custom coded action every time you need to do something, well, then prepare to go to make.com or something or some other middleware platform. And I think that's like that's hard to do. It's a limitation that I know kind of the ops team and the workflows team is aware of, but would be really nice to stay native in HubSpot to be able to perform like actions on a loop of return data or to query inside the system without actually having to write code every time.
Yeah. So usually, is that what people like when they reach these limits? Are they usually
Mhm.
using, tools like Make and Zapier and those
Yeah,
kinds of
I mean,
things?
I would say like they'll use something like I often go to make.com, or if it's a big enough thing, right? That and it depends on how many clients you're building it for. If you're just building it for a one-off, right? Because if it's a one-off, sometimes some of those things can get very like, zap action or operation heavy, and it costs a lot of like tasks, right? Or whatever. And the more you scale it up, or if you want to support more than just when this thing's created, loop through these things and do this thing, well, then you want to support, oh, it was updated, so I need to keep it in sync with this external system or within these other objects in HubSpot, right? Well, then you need to monitor update events, and those update events and those create events are all triggering your workflow action in this external system, right? Each one of those is costing you, depending on what system you're using, right? Um, so it's like it can get kind of expensive. So if you know that you've prototyped it in one of these external systems, it may be time now. Let's figure out how to put this into a custom coded action so that it can do it over and over. Because at this point, we're not changing the process anymore. We've done our prototyping. we've done our iterations, we've gotten feedback from the people who are involved in this feature we're bolting onto HubSpot, or this data management process we're bolting onto HubSpot. We feel everything's accurate. Okay, now let's put it into something that's not going to cost us money, but like it's really a lot harder unless you're just a wizard, right? Which I am no wizard. Um,
I've heard
uh,
otherwise.
well, I don't know, man. Like I keep, like I know how the things work, but I'm not fast at building them. Like as far as like when it comes to actually writing code, right? Um, anyway,
That's
yeah, I
why we
mean,
love
man,
HubSpot.
maybe I just have expectations that code should be able to be written a lot faster than it can be, or something like that. Maybe,
Hey man, we're seeing it
but
like using Hub Helper Harry
mm-hmm,
and then like getting Claude involved. Nico
mm-hmm,
and I were talking about that earlier today.
yeah,
Like this, I think a lot of this battle is just understanding, like use the tools that you need to use,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
right, to get the thing done. And that's why the
mm-hmm,
first step is like, okay, what do you need to do? Right?
right,
Understanding what the goals are for the business.
exactly,
Don't decide which tools you want to use first,
mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm,
Um,
yeah,
and I'm going to take a minute, like, because you mentioned your QuickBooks experience.
mm-hmm,
And I think this, and since neither of us work for HubSpot, we should be able to ideate on this or think about this in a fun way. Um,
yeah,
and I relate it to operations because this post-sales space, like this non-marketing and sales, let's say,
mm-hmm,
maybe not even service, like this non-customer facing stuff.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Like I've seen people show up in a way that it's like you're not speaking the language of the
mm-hmm,
business that you
yeah,
need to be speaking, and that is rampant right now when it comes to Commerce Hub,
mm-hmm,
both from a perspective of people not knowing like how to talk to the accounting teams, but also not having functionality necessary to even
mm-hmm,
be able to
mm-hmm,
show them what they need. And
yeah,
like the cash flow acquisition,
mm-hmm,
how do you like what comes to mind? And like, because I've been thinking very big when I think about what could be there as far as like, the gaps of we don't love the way quotes work. We don't love the way line
mm-hmm,
items work. We hear about
right,
ARR and MRR problems and challenges every single day,
mm-hmm,
right? For those who might not know what cash flow is, it's a B2B billing management and CPQ software. I'll note CPQ in terms of SaaS, not in terms
mm-hmm,
of manufacturing for any of my manufacturing friends out there. Uh, HubSpot just acquired them. And
mm-hmm,
usually, uh, what I've seen in these acquisitions, like much in the way of Clearbit, right?
mm-hmm,
Buy the
mm-hmm,
thing, there's an infrastructure reason that we buy it, and we
mm-hmm,
we build it into the system, but also cover a lot of gaps that have
mm-hmm,
been there for a long
yeah,
time. As we do that, I feel like this could be the most transformational,
yeah,
acquisition so far.
for sure.
What like when you first heard that, like what kinds of operational weaknesses is that going
Mm-hmm.
to solve for, do you think? Or are you hopeful that it
Yeah.
will?
I mean, right now, like if you want to use a bloody quote, like you got to have almost a CMS developer on your hands to modify the quote template so it doesn't look like poo. I mean, it's pretty bad, dude. Like, they're fine for simple stuff, but like if you want to get outside of anything beyond the brain dead simple, have fun doing in HubSpot quotes. You ain't. Like you can with excessive effort. It's possible. But dude, here's the other thing. You know what I figured out is that quotes aren't actually technically an object
Right.
in the HubSpot backend. Like, who did that? Like, I don't know how that happened, but man, all of the rework that's having to happen to remedy that issue. Ooh, I don't know. I feel maybe someone got fired for that. Like, I mean, whoever made that architecture decision a long time
Yeah.
ago was not
Well, that's what's
in line with the forward thinking data model. And the reason that HubSpot has the associations they have and how they structured all the rest of the system.
right. And that's
Yeah.
like for me, it became super evident, like as soon as payment links became available.
Yep.
And
Yep.
it's like, oh my God, I can do all of the things I've been wanting to do on the quote,
Hmm.
but somehow you can't just send it over to the quote. Like,
Right.
and as I learned more and interacted with the team, there's obviously an infrastructure problem.
Yep.
Like everybody's aware of the weaknesses and they would love to
Hmm.
be able to solve them,
Yeah.
especially when we talk about line items.
Yeah.
But there's been this infrastructure, and I think about it like it was like 2.0 HubSpot, and now we're on like
Hmm.
4.0.
Right.
And like now I feel like this acquisition,
Hmm.
they're gonna redo
Yeah.
all that.
Yep. I
And
think
like
they're going to
how,
re-architect that object structure, how the commerce tools are integrated into the quote tools and all of that kind of functionality. I mean, I think some of the commerce tools still are some of the biggest limitations to being able to like actually run your point of sale stuff. Um, you can't create invoices on the like on the fly via API to backfill old data. So there's no way to do data migration of historical information. There's no updating if there's a payment on it. Like, I mean, all these things are just a slog to get through and try and create an integration. Or so like my goal is always to work as closely as humanly possible to what HubSpot is building, so that any of the workarounds that I'm having to do to fill in the gaps, I'll be able to take off later, right? So it's like
yes,
when an invoice is created in QBO via the HubSpot integration, right? Well, what I do is after I know it got created, I'll like query the invoice via the get invoice API, make sure that I add to a custom property on the invoice what sub customer in QuickBooks that I think it should belong on, and then move it where I want it. I just let it put it wherever it wants it, and then I move it myself later and it stays in sync, right? But like, because I have no mechanism to map what customer in QBO would I like this invoice to land on, rather than, because they need to handle like all of that sync architecture, right? I wish they'd just let me put it where I wanted, right? And just like, hey, can I just give you an ID? Like, I got it, like I got this, I'm creating the customers in QBO. Just don't worry about it. Like creating a customer sync, not so much easier than creating like the invoice and line item sync. So just let me tell you where I want to put it. That'd be great. Thanks. you know,
yeah,
I know that's not necessarily the thing that they're trying to solve for. Like people who just start using the QBO integration want to be able to sign in and it just works. But like that goes back to what you're talking about messaging with like accountants. Like accountants don't speak the language of like ops people who don't speak the language of the sales department. I mean, like, being able to have somebody who can be a bridge and who like actually understands at least the basic principles of like income accounts, expense accounts, like how that money's being put through with like accounts receivable and accounts payable, and like how all of that information is getting reported on in QBO or whatever your accounting platform is, so that people can actually have their numbers line up and know how much tax they owe at the end of the year and the whole 9 yards. I mean, dude, taxes in
oh God,
QuickBooks are a absolute colossal difficulty to deal with. I just there's a lot of words that I could put in that
difficulty is a word. Yeah,
this descriptive sentence, and it's a very long string of descriptive words. But it's
yeah.
like, I mean, the tax agencies, and you can't query them sometimes because QBO API said no. And like sometimes it's like a state tax. It is just the US right here, right? Let alone the rest of the world. But like state tax, city tax, local tax, like all combined in one tax that gives you a tax rate. Like, man, I used to work in Washington State as a contractor. Like I used to actually be a residential remodeler. And when we were about to send an invoice, used to have to go to the Washington State Department of Revenue website, type in the address, and figured out who all wanted a piece of the pie to calculate the tax rate that we had to put on the invoice. And then we're also responsible for figuring out who we owe all this money to at the end of the year. Like, it's crazy, man. Like, this just, I get it, that like there needs to be a tax for stuff on certain things. and stuff. But man, it's a headache for small businesses, right? Like it just puts such a
Yeah.
huge burden on a small business. And like, I mean, even for HubSpot having to figure out how to make the taxes work, it's like it's hard to do more than here's a default tax rate, you know?
Right. And that's where it's like there's so many like what the transition here is like, at least in my experience, and the reason I've loved HubSpot is that you don't have to handle it like an IT
Mhm.
project.
Exactly.
There's a lot of F around and find out that you can do. But then
Yeah.
when you try to apply that to accounting stuff, like
Yeah.
nobody likes that
No.
for good reason. And that's where I know on a lot of this stuff, there's guardrails, and we can't do this yet for a lot of those reasons. Because, I mean, if we think there's, you know, data regulation related to customer data,
Oh
like
yeah.
watch what's about to happen when you start getting like financial data
Mhm.
and transactions. That's where this,
Mhm.
oh, I can't just take that one back. I can't just make another one. Like that's why
Yeah.
invoices like work the way
Or
they
so
do,
locked down, yeah.
right? Um, and
It's
that's
been really
where like,
frustrating for a lot of people. We got a HubSpot community thread, that my colleague Brian started about deleting invoices and like, don't make mistakes permanent. Cause he was just so ticked one day that he went in and tested some stuff and then you couldn't delete it. It's there forever, right?
yeah,
It's so brutal. But I get
yeah,
it. I just wish there was an easier way to like have a test mode when you're building out your integration that allows you to still function with all the production APIs, but the stuff can be nuked because it's not real data, if that makes sense.
yeah. And that's where like I'm hopeful and expecting. Like I've been telling people, even though when that acquisition happened, all the posts, I'm pretty sure 100% of them were about the fact that HubSpot bought a CPQ.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're more excited about the B2B like billing, like management part,
Mm-hmm. Oh
because
yeah.
all of these things go into that, like
Mm-hmm.
the way you handle taxes, the way you have to document everything, like because you can create
Mm-hmm.
those test environments, that ability to delete,
Mm-hmm.
but you have to create a space where that can be audited and somebody somewhere can tell that was deleted at some point,
Mm-hmm.
like to make sure that all the like because like all the nefarious stuff we hear
Yeah.
about when it comes to like
Yeah.
you know, companies trying to make profits and
Mm-hmm.
managing
And hide
margins
those
and this,
profits and yeah.
right, like that's all that becomes very possible when you start to create the same flexibility that we've always had in HubSpot
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
to be able to manage data
Yeah.
in that way. So that's,
Yeah.
you know, that's why we get read only.
Yeah.
And I think the difference is we thought maybe we would get you know, writable on their watch,
Yeah.
but maybe that doesn't come until they get the acquisition, you know,
Yeah.
built in.
Maybe. Maybe it
Um,
could be. Did you see a
so
while back the HubSpot developer docs? They I think it was the data warehouse.io guys posted about it. They were super pumped that they saw, oh man, subscription right endpoint, and then all of a sudden it was gone. Like it was like I clicked on it on LinkedIn, went to it. I'm like, bro, they launched it. Why is there no fanfare? And then like then I tried to make an API call to it just for fun with like Postman on my computer, and then it didn't work. It said this is not allowed, and then I like refreshed the page, and it was gone. Like somebody just got the docs built. They accidentally published, and then people who are got their ear to the ground all of a sudden are like, oh, this is the best thing
yeah,
since sliced
we're always
bread,
watching.
man. Yeah, we're always
Like,
watching,
and
right? And
we like we're used to those Easter eggs because you do that to us in the production instance already.
yeah,
So
right,
instead of
exactly. They
being
just
freaked
show
out
up.
by it, we're like, oh, what does this mean? Like, let's use
Yeah,
it right now. Like,
exactly. And then all of a sudden it was gone. I'm like, I messaged Jack. I was like in the commerce testing Slack channel, or whatever, with HubSpot. I was just like, Jack, you got my hopes up, man. Like I sent him a
right,
screenshot. He's like, oh yeah.
yeah. And there's this interesting like balance, and I think the challenge of Commerce Hub that I'm seeing, and I'm really excited for this to be solved for,
Mhm.
is this push and pull between SaaS is the primary like customer base, like 80 to 90% of the
Mhm.
customer base is related to
Right.
SaaS. Like they're the ones that understand the value of getting all the data in one
Mm-hmm.
place, and then especially the commerce data, right? Um, but then for them, it's not enough for them,
Right.
right? In most cases, like that's why we hear about the ARR and MRR challenges, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's an infrastructure issue, not like a we need to figure out like reporting, because a lot
Right.
of it again can be done
Yeah.
through like
It's just a
custom
matter
code
of missing
workflows,
data, essentially. It's a matter of missing linked data from the source of truth of where that thing's actually occurring. And like
right?
HubSpot it doesn't have to generate all your data. That's not what being a source of truth really means. What it means is if it's not the place in which that data originates, it should at least be a window to it, right? You should be able to at least
Yeah,
look with a read only window that you can't manipulate on this side. But if things are manipulated in that external system, it gets to the right spot in your current in your HubSpot, right?
yeah. No, I love helping people think through that because that can make integration work like so much easier. Like
Mm-hmm.
just to get like, hey, this is why we want it. Like we just
Yeah.
like in the three groups that I break it into, it's like generation of the data,
Mm-hmm.
maintenance and management of the data, which is
Mm-hmm.
a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of what Operations Hub is doing when you look at
Yeah.
most of the tools. But then also like communication of the data, right? Communication to internal stakeholders, customers. That is the ultimate reason why we want every damn piece of data into HubSpot.
Yeah.
Like,
Exactly.
because that's the easiest place to communicate it
Yeah.
from, and then historically understand that communication.
Right. Yeah.
And like, so helping people, understand that is a lot of what, right, these tools are can help us do if we, as consultants, as coaches, as
Mm-hmm.
people trying to help, like if we even like understand that those three things are very different things,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why these other systems have a role to play. We don't
Yeah.
want to create a lot of that data in HubSpot, like
No.
because it's not designed to do that.
Yeah, but it should at least be able to reference it, right? And I mean, I think
Right.
that's the thing that'll make HubSpot reporting sing is when you can bring that stuff in with data sets, create calculated metrics off of that information, and then run your reporting. Yes, it doesn't need to originate in HubSpot, but it should be visible in some capacity, right?
Yeah. And that's like the beauty of HubSpot is if it's visible to you or your customer facing team in HubSpot,
Mm-hmm.
that makes it as easier than any other place to then
Mm-hmm.
make it visible to the customer, right? Whether
Exactly.
it's on,
Yeah.
website pages or,
Mm-hmm.
automated emails.
Yeah.
Um, so man,
Yeah,
we
how
could go
cool
on.
is it? Like, oh yeah. Well, anyway, yeah. I'll
Let
leave it.
me,
I was just yeah.
I want to, no, go ahead, do it. Like
Well, I
this
was
is
just
all
saying, like,
organic
that
insight.
makes my brain go to like the send a webhook, action within HubSpot. I know we're limited to like get requests and post requests, right? But how cool is it that you can send a webhook in a workflow with associated object information, so you can query the contact, query the most recently associated company. You can format this webhook payload of all sorts of associated data normalized into one webhook that you can send off to another system. That's pretty slick, right? Being able to like get all the information you need from your data model and then do something with it. Cause like when you were talking about communicating, well, Ops Hub lets you, having that data in HubSpot lets you communicate it to your team, but it also lets you format it and communicate it to another system, even if it's a multi-object payload of data, right? And that I think is super cool as well. I think that's something
Yeah.
that people, the associated object data panel was one of the hugest steps in the right direction in the workflow tool in a long time. Like
Yeah.
it's amazing. You don't need the cross object property duplication nearly as much, although we have sync properties now too to help with that if needed. But man, that is a particularly underrated feature of Ops Hub as well, I think.
Yeah. No, I think that's where like this other part of the management and maintenance, like
Mm-hmm.
these things you haven't relied on, like basically until operations have existed.
Hmm.
right? You didn't expect you had to do that stuff outside of the system in some
Right.
way.
Yeah.
Um, but
And it
now
was
that you
pretty
can,
operation intensive, right? It would cost a lot of, okay, well, I have my trigger and now I need to query the contact and get these pieces and query the company and get these pieces. And then I need to get all the line items and iterate through the line items and make a webhook payload of all the line items or whatever, right?
yeah. And that's why like migrations and stuff like that, like went from like, and I'm kind of pulling numbers out here, but just to represent, like went from 9 to 12 months because we got to spend 6 months cleaning up your damn data, like,
Right.
and getting
Exactly.
help from your team because
Yeah.
they've got to be
To
the ones cleaning
understand
up the
it.
data, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
And now we're doing migrations inside of 3 months because we have these tools. And that's
Hmm.
where when you think of HubSpot as a marketing and sales tool only, like Operations Hub can fully support, like if this system sucks and you just want to pull all the data out and use HubSpot to help clean it up, especially
Hmm.
with AI. We didn't even touch on that today.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like that's the part, like that's worth it by itself,
Yeah.
right? And again, we're at that point of visibility,
Hmm.
just meaning everything, visibility and trust in what I'm seeing, right?
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
because it's definitely
Operations
not a
Hub really makes it
situation.
so people can trust the data, I think, right? That's
Yeah.
it makes you feel when set up and when you're using it to wash your data, to organize things in workflows, to communicate to external systems, to retrieve data from external systems. It really helps you feel confident that if everybody agrees on the metrics of your KPIs and what you do in HubSpot to make sure that that thing is calculated, it makes you feel very confident in your reporting.
Yes. And that was one thing I wanted to touch on. If it's financial reporting, you need to be like a
Right.
1000% confident,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And if you approach it from a perspective of, oh, like where the accountant's going, oh, that one doesn't make sense. It's like, oh yeah, let me
Hmm.
just fix,
Hmm.
right? Nope, done. Like not using this system,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Oh, people lose
uh,
faith in it quick.
yeah. So that visibility, building that trust because we can put the visibility in context for whoever's looking at, right? And
Hmm.
cutting down on all of this communication that happens because we don't understand or trust the data, right? Like this inherent
Hmm.
value in, like if I'm seeing it here as the
Hmm.
customer facing team member, I know that the report that the C-suite's going to see has the exact same data, and if I make this change, it's going to happen over here. Also from a customer like portal perspective or website perspective, like they could be looking at the exact same thing. And now when we're communicating, there's no like, oh, which version, are you looking at? Where are you seeing
Hmm.
that?
Hmm. Hmm.
Like all those questions that we got to
Yeah.
ask. Like, uh, yeah, please don't let people sift through like 15 days worth of their emails inbox to try and find that, thing that we talked to. Like,
Seriously.
anyways,
Yeah.
this has been awesome, man. I
Yeah.
love talking about this stuff, and
Hmm. Same.
hopefully this was valuable for people.
Hmm.
Just being able to hear Operations Hub, I think, talked about, in this way and how it's like
Right.
very integrated into the system. It is like it really should be a requirement. Like
Yeah.
if you're trying to use the whole platform,
Hmm.
this is why they just like basically throw it in to a lot of deals,
Hmm. Hmm.
because it's such a core element that will
Yeah.
provide a lot of value,
Yeah.
for any business. Um, so as you're thinking about, your data or your process that you're using right now to either manually enter data, manually clean up data, understand duplicates, right?
Hmm.
All those things, find those opportunities and let's grow. Have a great
Hmm.
day, everybody. Awesome.
Awesome, man.
Thanks for going.